Hello, BookTube. I have a poem for you today on this overcast Sunday, this day of rest here in Greater Boston. And it's a sad poem and a saccharine poem, and in some ways a silly poem, but it does call back to someone that we heard about just the other day. I mentioned just the other day a person named Lawrence Binyon. I mentioned him in context of his translation of Dante's Divine Comedy. And when I was mentioning that, I mentioned that he is most anthologized and perhaps best known for one particular poem about the dead of World War I called For the Fallen. Uh, it used to be in all kinds of anthologies. I don't know that it's anthologized anymore, but I don't know what is anthologized, so I could be wrong about that. But I thought, since I mentioned this character, and since this Lawrence Binyon, as far as I know, never had a biography, and maybe never will. There's plenty of material out there. I don't think his name is well known. I don't think he studied or anthologized or anything. I thought it might be fun, in a way, for our poetry reading today to read For the Fallen. I'm not always reading famous poems on this channel, and I don't think For the Fallen is famous anymore. But I thought we'd go through it and just see what we make of it. So this is For the Fallen, which is dated 1914. With proud thanksgiving, a mother for her children, England mourns for her dead across the sea. Flesh of her flesh they were, spirit of her spirit, fallen in the cause of the free. Solemn the drums thrill, death, august and royal, sings sorrow up into immortal spheres. There is music in the midst of desolation, and a glory that shines upon our tears. They went with songs to the battle, they were young, straight of limb, true of eye, steady and aglow. They were staunch to the end against odds uncounted. They fell with their faces to the foe. They shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning we will remember them. They might not be with their laughing comrades again. They sit no more at familiar tables of home. They have no lot in our labor of the daytime. They sleep beyond England's foam. But where our desires are and our hopes profound, felt as a wellspring that is hidden from sight, to the innermost heart of their own land they are known, as the stars are known to the night. As the stars that shall be bright when we are dust, moving in marches upon the heavenly plain, as the stars that are starry in the time of our darkness, to the end, they remain. Just lovely and heartfelt. Right? I'm not mocking the craft of the poem. The craft is very good. You can see, though, why I would call it saccharine and even maybe a little silly. Right? The monuments to the dead of World War I have slowly grown over mosses and faded and sunken into the earth. And the characterization of the young dead who went here is, well, this is a prayer. This is a wartime prayer. This is meant to buck up the spirits of a war-beset generation. It's not meant to be accurate. So maybe it's a little churlish for me to point out how it is not accurate. They were not going to fight for freedom. They were going to fight for land. The inhabitants of Kaiserine Germany were free. They were as free as the inhabitants of Britain were free. And they didn't face foes uncounted, right? The numbers at World War I are well known. They weren't facing the legions of Sauron. And they died with their faces to the foe, except for all the times in which they didn't, in which they were maimed, or in which they were pulped from the inside by traumatic stress from high-range explosives that detonated over them while they were fleeing from the battlefield. Or, how many hundreds, maybe even thousands, died drowned in mud, literally drowning in mud. We have endless eyewitness accounts of that, of just some wretched doughboy at the end of a line who slipped off a plank and drowned in mud. No one knows where that person is. The mud sucked him right down into the crust of the earth. No one knows where that person is. Many, many times, you'd have a hard time even learning that person's name, even uncovering who that person was, just their name. In other words, the realities of World War I, of the fighting experience of World War I, do not intrude on this poem. The way they do on the poems of a lot of World War I poets. And I can't help but wonder if that reflects on Lawrence Binion's character just a bit, or his situation in the civilian world, or even when this poem was written, before uh, those full horrors were known. So you see what kind of a poem this is. It isn't meant to do what a lot of our poetry ever since, in the 100 years since, has been meant to do, which is to use language as shards to pin the truth to a dissecting board. The greatest poems of ours in the last 100 years have done exactly that. I would argue that they were given the impetus to do that specifically by the collective traumas of World War I and World War II. I think this poem harks to a different age. This is, I think, a much more Kipling-esque poem, although Kipling often didn't pull his punches about the reality of what he was talking about dying on a distant grave far from England's foam. So there's a lot to figure out in this poem, whether or not you like this kind of fairly simple exaltation of wartime death. The poet, the narrator of the poem For the Fallen, never makes it explicitly clear, but it seems pretty easy to infer from this poem that the narrator of the poem admires the dead, and therefore maybe by easy extension would not have wanted the war not to happen. I think that's pretty interesting. I think reading poetry of this time period of a certain type brings that kind of interesting question right to the fore. I should point out that Lawrence Binion's writing, critical and poetic peers often had nothing but mockery for this kind of poem. That means to ease the burden of the widows, means to ease the burden of grieving mothers at home, as Binion himself said. What is a poem for the fallen that you can write for the mother of the fallen? That's a different kind of war poem than you're going to get if you're not writing with them in mind. If you're writing with maybe your dead brother in mind. Unless that's what happened to this poem too, in which case we need to know a lot more about Lawrence Binion than we do, because of the poor biographical efforts that have been done on his behalf. But anyway, a bit of an odd, a little bit of a grim choice for a Sunday poem, but we'll find something different next time. Thank you, BookTube.